Welcome to the Vineet Loya Show. The goal of this podcast is to share with you the information, knowledge, wisdom I acquired from various sources, like by listening to different podcasts, by reading different books, or even interacting with people in real life. Like every single one of you, my life is a collection of my experiences, and these experiences are sometimes insightful, sometimes even dumb. And I hope both of these help you in your personal life. Thank you so much for listening. Hi, in this episode, you will listen to my conversation with Paul Diamond. Paul is a shaman based out of Peru, and he works with plant medicines such as ayahuasca. I had a pleasure to work with him a couple of years back during my ayahuasca ceremony. Paul is extremely knowledgeable in various cultures and their approach to understanding the mysterious world. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So thank you so much, Paul, for connecting in. I really appreciate this. And I want to start with the exciting project you're working on currently. I am really excited to know the Secret Valley project, which you started. I wanted to know and let all the audience know, how you came about this project and what's the end goal or what's the aim of this project altogether.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you for your interest, of course, first of all. And we have a number of things kind of going on at the moment, things that really I've had kind of in the back of my own mind for really a number of years, in fact, and are now just coming to fruition on the material plane at least, which of course is where we really want it to manifest. So that's great news. So we've really got ourselves a new centre, and in this centre we hope to bring about a number of different angles that I've been kind of trying to bring together, really. So my main kind of interest in some regards is bringing about a connection between the studies of the Western scientific academic side of things, along with the systems of shamanism we find across the world, along with the schools of mysticism and meditation from the Eastern cultures primarily. And I see this blending of science, shamanism, and mysticism stroke meditation coming together in the work that I'm trying to bring forward at this time. So we hope to have on one side of the equation.
Yeah, that's really exciting. I am in a way I'm very curious to know how you got into the blend of different cultures, of different understanding how different cultures approach to the consciousness, and there's not just one particular way. And how did your journey begin altogether into shamanism?
Well, shamanism specifically, or the whole field?
I would say the whole journey altogether. So wherever you want to start.
You want the whole story, huh? I don't know how long you've got. Well, really, I've been on a very passionate search for truth and for meaning, to understand what we are, who I am inside, and to know what God is, if anything. So I've really been on a very, very passionate and fiery search since really the very of the time I can remember, going all the way back to childhood. I was really always absolutely obsessed by the world of magic and ghosts and spirits and mysticism and time travel and UFOs and aliens. And I mean, I was the weird kid. If there was a weird kid at school, this was me. So I was really kind of into it from the very first time I can remember. And I was having very kind of peculiar experiences, again, as far back as I can remember, engaging with otherworldly beings and, you know, experiencing sort of slips of dimensional reality, and going into altered states in a fairly easy way, finding myself outside of my body on a fairly regular basis, those kinds of things. And it really kind of, it never went away, you know. Obviously my parents and everyone else was hoping it would go away by my teenage years, but it kind of came back in force, and I became even more obsessed. And, you know, in that journey, I think that I came to certain realizations, certain conclusions and understandings that fulfilled a lot of the desires and the things that I was seeking. I kind of found a lot of what I was looking for really along the way. So as part of that whole game, I was engaged with many different spiritual practices, many different spiritual traditions, and taking practice very seriously, doing many hours of practice per day, and, you know, really moving into each of the traditions that I became involved with as much fullness and intention as I could bring to that. So I engaged with certain schools of yoga and the kind of the hermetic tradition, the magical traditions, and I was involved with the Sufis for some time, and I was involved with different Tantric schools for certain lengths of time. And eventually I also decided that along with all of the very practical things that I was engaged with, I wanted to also take up the academic side of it. So I went out and got myself a master's degree in the study of mysticism and religious experience from Canterbury University, and that gave me, it pushed me actually much more into the mystical side of things. I think I was very interested in magic, and I was very interested in manipulation, and a kind of quite an egoic and willful desire to make change in the world according to my will, according to my imagination. And as I got more into the mysticism studies, that led me more to the kind of understandings of surrender and, you know, moving to more of a non-dualistic kind of understanding and approach to the world. And at this time, I also began to engage considerably more with the entheogenic medicines as well, and kind of, you know, from the entheogens really, from a shamanic basis. This is where I really began my major explorations of the different shamanic paths around the world. And I went over to Mongolia and got initiated over there, and over in Nepal, and over in Haiti and some other places around the planet, and kind of, you know, went deeply into the world of shamanism and the world of ayahuasca very particularly. And, you know, now again, kind of bringing all of these things back together again, you know, now that I find myself again in this kind of feeling that I'm on the other side of that deep inner search to more of a balanced space of teaching and a space of inner integration.
Wow, that is amazing how you explode different cultures and how different cultures approach to the concept of mysticism and consciousness and magic, and how it kind of led your life path to where you are now. When you during your travels, so what all countries did you went to? You did mention about Mongolia, Poland, and a few other countries. So how did the different countries play a part in getting more understanding about consciousness or mysticism in particular? How was the learning experience from mysticism from one culture to another? How did you felt like at any point did you feel that any of this mysticism was exploited, or there was an underlying element which general people were missing, and you get a hands-on to understanding and studying all of these concepts altogether?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's something like, the suggestion that if, each culture's perception of different levels of reality is something like, a particular picture or snapshot in a photo album, then obviously the more pictures, the more snapshots you can take to have in your album, the fuller picture you have of consciousness and what that is as a whole than if you take any individual expression or viewpoint upon that. So the more pictures we have, obviously, the clearer picture we have of what the hell this consciousness thing is, what we are as a species, what we are inside of us. So I think it gave a kind of quite a broad and luckily deep view and understanding of what that is. Obviously the flip side of that is always going to be prone to superficiality. This notion that you just take a tiny little bit of a particular thing, and this is where our notions of cultural appropriation sort of come from, is just this lack of depth when we engage with other cultures, just taking off the kind of the fancy clothing and using that as the kind of, this is who I am now. So I really wanted to avoid that in my own travels. I wasn't really trying to become a collector of as many different initiations or something as possible. It was more I really wanted to know, and I really wanted to explore as much as I could. I really wanted to engage with the different spirits that each of these cultures were engaging with. One thing I became kind of very interested in and obsessed by was possession states and spiritual schools that use spiritual possession as a vehicle and as a means. And I really wanted to explore these different kind of beings that each of these cultures was engaging with. What kind of relationship did they have with these beings? And how did they know about them? And what did they know about them? And what did it tell us about ourselves through these kind of relationships? So I went around to try and explore what were they connecting to on the other side of the equation? What allies were they working with? And, how much of that are we able to bring through into the three-dimensional plane in order to effect change at this level for the benefit of the community? I was really interested at this level. So I went around to all of these different places with some fairly, good intentions, at least in my own mind, and really wanted to study and learn as much as I could. And I was really always looking for the teacher and the guru. And although I have found very great masters along the way, I think that I learned a great many things from nearly everyone that I encountered along my journey, really. They all had a piece of the puzzle. They all had something to teach me. And definitely it helped to fill out my picture of what that other world is all about, the world of magic, the world of shamanism, the world of the occult, the world of mystery and magic. I sort of, gained quite a good understanding of what was going on that side. So, and ultimately, really, it led to more radical conclusions, because I went into a lot of it with a very dualistic understanding that the beings that we were engaging with were very objective, very autonomous, very other, and that in that was the utility, that they were going to be able to provide us with information, with knowledge, with power, with wisdom, that we were not going to be able to have ourselves, because they were so patently other than ourselves. But in my journey and across the board of examining these different cultures and how they relate to the world of spirit and magic and mysticism, I really came to a new conclusion. And that conclusion really sort of approaches much more to the Eastern model of spiritual attainment and the non-dual philosophies of Zen, of Advaita Vedanta, and these kind of higher ordered spiritual methodologies.
Among all of these different concepts, how does ayahuasca fit in, and what was your personal experience with ayahuasca itself?
Well, I've been working now with ayahuasca for 15 years. I became very interested in the medicine myself 10 years previous to that, in fact. When I did my first bachelor's degree, I actually wrote my final dissertation on the subject of ayahuasca.
So, sorry, how old were you when you initially got interested in ayahuasca?
I was 19. I was 19 when I became very interested. The rave culture in England was really kind of kicking off. It is kind of, I just missed the real peak of the rave culture. That was around 89 and 90. I started going to university in 91. But even at that time, of course, there was still a great deal of, really good music around and lots of other things. And through the music, in fact, I began listening more to the lyrics and to the kind of the subtle spoken word underneath a lot of these things. And there was one band in particular, but because of my preferences, I was very fascinated with. They were called the Shaman. And the Shaman used to have Terence McKenna tracks over, beat music. And I suddenly started tuning in more to what he was saying. And he was speaking about 2012 very particularly in those days. And he was speaking about this archaic revival, a shamanic revival, a return to our shamanic roots. And I went out and read all of his material. And of course, obviously, in reading his material, you encounter ayahuasca and DMT very quickly. And I became very fascinated with ayahuasca and its particular relationship with sound. I was very, very fascinated by sound and what sound was able to do to consciousness and how it could change consciousness. I became particularly interested in the magical languages, Enochian magic, the Sanskrit language, Hebrew language, the rune stones, tarot cards, things that had a kind of, this symbolic relationship, but also an esoteric function. And I became interested in the ayahuasca because I became very, very interested in this idea of being able to see sound. This is what McKenna was talking about, this idea that under the influence of the medicine, one can see tapestries of sound presented to oneself in the form of visual imagery. And I became fascinated by that notion and drew the conclusion that it had something to do with how the yogis were using mantra and how mantra was able to open the activity of the pineal gland to release phenethyltryptamine in order to be able to produce the yantric images, the yantras, the geometric shapes and patterns that one finds in the tantric tradition. And I thought, they must have found a way to do this internally without the use of the medicine. Nonetheless, I certainly wanted to try the medicine, but it wasn't until 10 years later that I was in fact introduced to it. And the moment I was introduced to it, I was pretty much hooked. It was giving me many of the things that I've been looking for. It was revealing a lot of things to me, teaching me many things. And it was really kicking in and opening up a lot of the spiritual practices that I'd been taking very seriously and had been doing for many hours a day. It wasn't getting that much from. I was getting the general, I'm relaxed, I feel good in my body and calm in my mind, but I wasn't getting the supernormal abilities and the, all of the kind of the wild stuff that I was really seeking and craving. And ayahuasca was really providing me with nearly all of those types of experiences extremely early. And because I had the academic background, I could also verify my own personal experiences against the mystical text and say, this is valid because it's identical with this. I recognize it even as I'm having the experience as being identical with a particular thing from a Kundalini text as an example or something like this. So I stayed with my teacher in England drinking for over 3 years. At the end of that time, we drank for 30 days in a row, and that was kind of our initiation. And then he sent me off to see his teacher in the jungles here in Peru. I trained with him for some time. And he immediately said to me, in fact, on arriving there, he said, you're an ayahuasquero. And I was quite surprised because I said, I'm not. I don't really want to do that. I'm from England. We don't have ayahuasqueros in England. But he was very insistent. And as I was leaving him, he basically said to me, go home and run ceremony. And I said, I don't really want to do that, thank you. And he said, you have no choice. So he said, go home and run ceremony. He said, I'll be there. I'll help you in the vision state. And I said, okay, I hope so, because I don't know what I'm doing. And I went home and I started to brew up and I started to run ceremony. And here we are many years later, and, you know, quite a few people have started to come in you know, many times per month.
Yeah, that's really fascinating how you, in a way, you transit from your life in England to explore ayahuasca medicine altogether. How was your first ayahuasca session in the sense like the group setting wise? And I'm also curious to kind of understand and know what role the group setting plays, because we want to make sure that when you have an experience within group, it's very much different from when someone have experience by themselves, right? So I recall when we had this interaction earlier, a couple of years back now, you did mention having the group is very important. So I would love to hear your experience about the group setting altogether.
So you're asking me how my own personal experience was the first time I drank, or?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, it was certainly one of the most terrifying experiences in my life, that's for sure. And while I was in it, I was very convinced that I would never, ever be doing this again. That was certainly the last time that I'd be ever going anywhere near this stuff. And I'd actually gone with a guy who had done it at that time 3 times. And I came out of the experience and I was like, how had you done this 3 times? How did you ever go back and do that again after the first time? And about 2 hours later, I was still thinking probably the same thing. But I woke up the next morning and I suddenly realized that it was the most authentic, powerful, scary, and useful experience that I had probably ever been through. And obviously, I'm sure that that's, you know, a common thought. And I said even by lunchtime that day, I have to do this again as soon as possible. And me and the guy that I'd gone with, we both signed up for that for the next weekend, that first weekend. And yeah, it was all uphill from there, luckily.
Did you knew you would pursue to become shaman after your first few experience, or how was the realization?
No,
or when did you realize?
No, not at all. I mean, well, the thing is, you know, I mean, I think that, you know, the term really is never, hopefully the term is never really self-applied. Again, I knew that I was a weird kid. I knew that I'd had lots of strange experiences, and I knew that I was, you know, really obsessed by that world, and, you know, calling it on as often as possible. You know, please let me have these kinds of experiences. Let these things happen to me, and I would do my best to make it happen. But it wasn't sort of anything that I kind of applied to myself, really. The first indications really that I was going to go down that road was I started to get very heavily possessed in ayahuasca space by Kali, the goddess Kali, who was my own teacher's Ishtar Devatar, which is the personal deity, the personal god. His own personal deity was Kali Ma, and Kali started to come through me really strongly to the point where I was not able to stop myself going up and doing healing work and being moved around the room in very strange ways, and mudras and mantras kind of flying out of me, and very, very kind of potent experiences. But it certainly wasn't even then called for in a I want to become this or I want to do this. It was just what was happening, and I kind of had no choice in just going with it. And those experiences built some, you know, pretty big crescendos, and really it was very kind of driven by the other side, by the world of the spirit, by the world of the God, and was really not something that I was asking for or calling for in a professional capacity, for sure. Mm-hmm. And when Don Agustin Rivas told me, you know, you're an ayahuasca, you have to run ceremony, I genuinely did not want to. I'd seen what my own teacher had been doing. I'd seen the power and breadth of his work and the depth of his work, and was super impressed. I thought, that's a very scary profession. That's a very scary job. You know, enormous responsibility on very, very profound levels. And I didn't really want it. But Agustin was very, very insistent that I really did not have a choice in the matter. And he kind of pushed me into at least trying. And when I was younger also, you know, I was told kind of over and over again that many people are going to start coming to see you. I didn't really know how that was going to manifest. I did used to have a yoga studio in Thailand. Lots of people started to come and see me then, but I thought I wasn't really ready for it. I thought I wasn't mature enough. I thought it would feed my ego. So I closed the whole thing down and turned my back on it and went back again into my aesthetic, meditative lifestyle. And I thought that was the end of that. I thought, you know, I kind of turned my back on it. But the more medicine work I've done, the more ceremonies I've run, and the more work I've done kind of outside of that arena, yeah, in fact, you know, many people are beginning to come, and, you know, there's something destined in there somewhere. But I try not to take it very personally. You know, it's not really about me. It's more of a kind of a functional role. It's my 9 to 5. It's my office job in the end, you know, maybe something like this.
Mm-hmm. As a shaman, what is the primary focus when you help out other people? What is the primary intention? Because this experience is so personal and could bring different set of memories and emotions within people who are going through the experience.
I'm not sure that my primary focus is necessarily or has been necessarily part of the traditional focus of shamans at large. I think that shamanism really up until the present age has been, well, firstly, of course, not a religion, but a set of tools, a certain technology or a certain set of technologies. And its aims have been extremely broad, wide and varied, but not necessarily aimed at the same kind of liberation or enlightenment type energy or understanding as perhaps is found within the Eastern mystical meditative traditions. So shamanism, traditionally speaking, has been used for healing, and that healing has been up to a certain level, but never really directed towards any kind of final goal, really. Shamanism hasn't necessarily been a pathway, a spiritual path, so much as a means of reconnecting with the energies of nature, of the earth, of the spirits of the planets, of the mountains, of localized kind of energies. They've sometimes engaged with gods and deities and things like that, but it never really kind of pushed the practitioner or the person coming to see the practitioner towards any kind of higher goals necessarily. If they happened, they were usually some kind of a byproduct of the healing experience. My goal personally is to try to take all of these energies that we have within the field of shamanism, all the technologies and tools that we have within the field of shamanism, and move them in the direction of freedom, in the direction of liberation, liberated energy, in the direction of enlightenment, and in the direction of non-duality, ultimately.
So you were speaking about some of the technology. So I'm very curious about which technology you're super excited about, which would potentially offer more clarity to people about consciousness or enlightenment, as you mentioned.
Well, it's interesting because the tool, of course, is really just a finger pointing at the moon. It's a vehicle by which we can move towards truth. It isn't necessarily the truth itself, other than in its deep and non-dualistic sense. So whilst I see that there is extraordinary relative value to the entheogens, particularly to ibogaine, iboga, to San Pedro, Wachuma cactus, ayahuasca, psilocybin mushrooms, and these medicinal plants. Whilst I see that there is great relative value in them, I see that they have the ability to be a tool to open us up to the expression of the infinite, ultimate, non-dual truth of the pervasive nature of consciousness. In other words, whilst we can experience different levels of healing on the medicine, whilst we can encounter different beings on the medicine, and whilst we can move into other states of consciousness on the medicine, I think that their primary utility is actually much deeper in that they are able to directly point to the nature of consciousness itself. If we don't get caught up with all the different manifestations, if we don't get caught up in all of the phenomenon and the arisings that take place on the medicines at any level, be it mental, emotional, physical, energetic, psychic, spiritual, karmic, any of these things, if we don't fall into the trap of attaching to any individualized experience within that field or plethora of experience, then what we're able to point at is a much more direct understanding that your ability to experience all of these different states of consciousness really shows you ultimately that in fact you are the ground of being. You yourself are the ground of being. Your own consciousness yourself is the ground of being. Because of its nature, because of its ability to have this plethora of experience, in the end it has to show you that it's all taking place within the field of none other than you.
That's a really interesting point which you raised, that these are all tools. All of these medicines are tools to understand the inner self. What is the simplest tool anyone can use in today's world if the people who don't have time to explore these medicines to walk towards the inner goal or consciousness or enlightenment?
Well, I think that it has to ultimately be a multifaceted inquiry. One of the simplest tools, though, is this ability that we have to enter into yet another altered state. Every time we go to sleep at night, we enter into the field of dreams, and the field of dreams really gives us some very clear pointers to the nature of reality, gives us some very clear pointers. As clear a pointer, in fact, as medicine, as clear a pointer, in fact, as meditation, if we are able to approach it correctly and understand it correctly. So there we are in the dream state, and we encounter other beings, other objects, other situations, and it appears that we're engaging in some kind of objective reality, that we're engaged with other people, autonomous entities. Sometimes we kind of get a glimpse that they perhaps not, but we can't really break through into any deeper realization. But of course, when we wake up, we realize, well, all of that was inside of us. All of that was just us and none other than us, even though it appeared to be so objective another. And really, this is no different in the medicine condition. When we drink medicine, when we drink heavy entheogens, we enter into another universe, another world, and it appears again that we're engaging in this kind of objective, autonomous reality populated by beings and entities. And when we wake up, when we come down at the end of our experience, we again need to realise, or ought to realise, that once again, this clearly is all happening within the field of our own consciousness. Now, that field of consciousness doesn't have to have any limit. It is, in fact, limitless, because it includes our own body and includes our own minds, but it also includes all of these other experiences, the psychedelic experiences, the meditation experiences, the visualization experiences, the medicine experiences. It's all there within consciousness itself. So the dream can be used as a very, very clear tool as to what the hell is going on. What is the nature of this apparently three-dimensional, apparently objective and autonomous reality also? Of course, there are many other tools, meditation tools and, tools of consciousness research, flotation tanks, things of this nature. There are, in fact, many, many ways that we can explore these questions of who and what we are and this energy that we appear to be. Many tools, in fact, from many cultures.
Absolutely. I personally have experienced meditation and sensory deprivation tank. Those are really amazing tools which people can use in day-to-day life to explore their own set of mindset and thoughts. So would you recommend anyone to explore these tools before trying out the alternate medicines? Or in other words, are there any people who you would say are not ready to experience the medicines because of their mindset or because of whatever other factors? Or how would you differentiate, or did you ever turn away anyone who may be mentally fit, but they didn't have the correct intention or mindset to experience ayahuasca medicine?
Yeah. I think, of course, no, it would be horribly naive and irresponsible to suggest that these medicines are appropriate for one and all. That would be a mistake. It's not that way by any means. Not, of course, just on a mental level, not just on a psychological level, but also on a physical level, perhaps on an age-based level even. I think that we need to use these very, very powerful medicines with great discrimination and care. They're not to be used indiscriminately. They're not to be used outside of very traditional settings and environments, and certain different technologies that need to be in place in order to make sure that the space is safely held and things like this. So, yeah, of course, we've turned people down, and I will continue to turn people down who are not ready for whatever reason. Yeah, I think any kind of broad brush strokes when it comes to these things should be avoided. Standard diets or foods, or not everything is suitable for everybody, and every case has to be assessed individually.
You did mention about people should have a specific diet, or I recall there was specific instructions to cleanse the body before going through the ayahuasca experience by keeping ourselves away from processed foods and, in some sense, unnatural foods. So I'm curious of what role does the food and the diet plays in order to prepare oneself for ayahuasca experience?
I think actually to some degree a lot less import needs to be given to it than is given to it. But I think, of course, again, it does depend on what you were doing previously. If you were, eating, heavy processed foods on a regular basis and condensed sugars and, things that everybody knows are not good for you. Obviously, if you're doing things like this that are really going to be detrimental to the body in the long run anyway, then of course it's going to be beneficial for you to desist from those activities. With regards to the ayahuasca itself, it's going to clean you out whatever. So to a certain degree, it doesn't matter so much. But obviously, the more you clean yourself out previously on every level, the further the medicine is able to go to each time you drink. Which again is, I advocate a lot of very to continue to be doing practices on a regular basis outside of medicine, not just to integrate the medicine experiences, but to both facilitate the experiences when you do come to re-engage with the medicines, but also to grow and develop and evolve on a daily basis just through the practices.
On a separate topic, when you prepare ayahuasca medicine itself, how many types of vines are there? Correct me if I'm wrong, but ayahuasca as a medicine as a whole combines of 2 vines.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think actually to answer your initial question, I wonder if perhaps then they don't know how many different types of ayahuasca vine there are. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if they find more as we move deeper into the jungles and, do our botanical analysis on a deeper basis. It wouldn't surprise me. As far as I'm aware at this stage, we probably know probably around 5 or 6 different varieties of Daoist carpi. I think, they're kind of named by colour. We have this yellow ayahuasca, we have white ayahuasca, we have red ayahuasca, we have black ayahuasca, we have sky ayahuasca, and we have earth ayahuasca, which is a creeping vine along the ground rather than up the trees. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if they found more as they search more. Of course, the other thing is there's no wild ayahuasca left, in any of the surrounding areas, around any of the places that people know, because of the deforestation of the medicine. So there's that to consider. And its main function from a Western ethnobotanical perspective, of course, is to activate or to open the DMT, the dimethyltryptamine component from the DMT-containing plant, whatever plant that happens to be, Chaliponga or Trichrona or Mimosa hostilis or whatever it is. But of course, from a shamanic perspective, a traditional shamanic perspective, we're not so interested in alkaloids as we are in spirit. And from that perspective, the spirit of the vine is considered to be much more potent, much stronger, much deeper, and much more able to take us to the very deep levels of healing that are truly needed. The dimethyltryptamine spirits definitely have a healing role. They definitely do minor surgery, but it's really the ayahuasca that goes in and does the real deep stuff. So it's considered to be a stronger spirit generally. And my teacher, Agustin, in fact, he used to make his medicine sometimes with no DMT in it. If he was going to work in Europe, which he used to do a lot, he used to travel with just the vine, fairly thick vine, but even so, just vine. He still was able to produce, very, very strong visions in people, the full deal, but without the DMT component.
I'm assuming that all of these vines have different experience in the setting, of course.
Yeah, they are considered to have different qualities. In my own experience with all of them, I've used all of them at some point or another in my work. They are not radically different. They are different, and you can tell that they're different, but they're not radically different, I would say. Some of them are definitely better for kind of the more magic side of it. Some of them are definitely better for the more kind of, first-time beginner side of it. Some people more for the visionary side of it. But ultimately, you definitely know when you take in any of them, this is ayahuasca, this is what ayahuasca feels like.
Does the quantity of ayahuasca also matter? Like if someone is sipping only very little quantity versus high dose, how does that differ?
I would say it doesn't seem to matter as much as it ought to, or that you would think so. Sometimes you can drink a very small amount of medicine and have a very, very potent experience. Sometimes you can drink a very large amount of medicine and you feel or think that nothing's happening.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting. So the quantity in some sense doesn't matter, even though we want to make sure like no one start chugging a lot of ayahuasca. But based on your experience, quantity is irrelevant as much as the attitude or the approach to the medicine itself.
I wouldn't go as far as to say that it's irrelevant. but I would go as far as to say it's definitely a magical relationship, a shamanic relationship between quantity and quality, rather than a scientific quantifiable, if you drink this much, you're going to get this level of experience. I mean, really, when we're dealing with these alkaloids, with the psychotropic alkaloids, it's always like this. You never really know what you're going to get in some ways. You know, it's going to open portals and dimensions of consciousness that, you know, can be very wild and mysterious and vast. You know, even on a very tiny amount of these substances sometimes. I think perhaps on one level, because, you know, we're so very well adapted to engage with these plants. You know, we have the receptor sites, and we're alive to it. You know, we're calling out for it in some regards. And so when the body gets even a modicum amount, sometimes it's prepared to go the whole hog in terms of experience. The other side of the equation, where you drink a hell of a lot and nothing seems to happen, is in perhaps a little bit more mysterious in some ways, because then it shows that certain aspects of the body are blocking or closing you down to the potential experience.
Yeah, please let us know about that, because one of the common themes I noticed with ayahuasca was to surrender completely to the medicine. How would someone who is about to experience ayahuasca can work on their internal blockage as well as surrender to the medicine at the same time?
Well, you know, I mean, obviously people are coming to these ceremonies with, you know, a wide variety of different life experience. One can even say different lifetimes of experience. And of course, we can have blockages and all different levels of our being, you know, ranging from, you know, your base physical injuries all the way up to, you know, huge karmic knots that need to be undone. So we're coming with all of these different things. So, you know, the medicine is going to be working at many, many different levels, depending on what the participant has asked for personally. And also, obviously, the intention of the shaman, the intention of the people holding space. So that's all going to kind of like play a role. And then, of course, it comes down to more occult reasons even than that, in terms of how, you know, astrology plays a role in any particular evening's experience or not, where the, you know, different sort of astral forces, what's happening on that level. Diet is playing a role, metabolism is playing a role, your emotional work is playing a role. All of these different things come together to, you know, say, so that sometimes when you drink a lot of medicine, not a lot of is happening. And it's usually not happening at the level of consciousness. But from my perspective, you know, holding ceremony, I can see that actually the medicine is working. The medicine is doing things at actually quite a deep level, and that it isn't necessarily important at this stage of this individual's work for them to know what's going on consciously. You know, it might need to be filtered down later on, or it might need to, you know, come into consciousness in other ways, not necessarily right there and then. Really, what's happening during the ceremony is not really that important to the results of the ceremony, which is what you ought to be looking for, in my opinion.
How would you take away from the ceremony, like after each and every ceremony, because there is so much information packed in based on your own personal life? How do you approach post-ceremony? Like once the ceremony is completed, what are the steps or what actions do you take or what do you recommend everyone to take?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously it depends on the level of insight gained in ceremony as to the utility of that level of information. You know, sometimes it's more useful and we can apply it more directly. Sometimes it's a lot more abstract and we can't necessarily find a way to apply it very directly. In my view, the higher insights of the medicine need and want to be applied very directly to our lives. But I do feel that it needs a careful guiding hand and some clear explanation, sometimes in great detail, in order for the participant or student to draw out that level of insight. It's not altogether clear, ought not to be taken at literal value, and some literal things ought to be taken more symbolically, some symbolic things ought to be taken more literally. And the deeper lessons nearly always need to be pointed out. You know, we have this notion in the Eastern wisdom traditions of pointing out instructions. And pointing out instructions are not there to create something or bring something into manifestation. They are there to point directly to what is already present that is perhaps unseen. And likewise, I feel that it takes these pointing out instructions under the guidance of a master or a teacher in the medicine in order to really be able to get the real value of it, which points directly towards the nature of consciousness, directly towards the nature of impermanence, directly towards the nature of love as the guiding, leading, and necessary force of change on the planet, and our true identity as emptiness and fullness also.
One of the other things that I was checking into was the new trend with ayahuasca, because it's so potent and powerful and could be life-changing for so many different people who are struggling with their addictions or personal lives in general. How would someone who is interested in ayahuasca should begin with? Are there any questions they should ask themselves personally before even considering to experience this medicine?
Yeah. Well, I think we do need to be very careful, again, not to fall into some kind of naive idealism when it comes to the value of these medicines. I'm not suggesting that the medicines don't have enormous importance and value. They certainly do. But at the same time, I think we need to be careful of considering any substance of any kind a magic bullet that is going to suddenly solve all of our problems and change our lives overnight and make everything okay. It's not going to be like that. You know, any mature relationship, any kind of spiritual tradition recognizes it's going to always take a certain amount of effort. It's going to be difficult to a certain degree. We're going to have to face difficult aspects of ourselves, uncomfortable aspects of ourselves. You know, we need to be prepared to actually need and want to do the relevant amount of work to get to actually where we want to be ultimately. So as long as we're mature, as long as we're sensible, and as long as we go into these fields of inquiry with a kind of equanimity and a kind of, an openness and let's see what this can do for me, rather than bracketing it into this is what it's going to do for me. And as long as, again, one has a careful teacher, then of course we can derive enormous value from these medicines, and they can be life-changing, and hopefully we can take those insights and truths back out into our family, into our friends, into our communities, and make powerful and active change there to help and save this planet and where we are as a species.
Right. So someone with open-mindedness and who is curious about the inquiry, how can we check out the correct place or setting to experience this? Because as you're very much aware, because of the new ayahuasca tourism in some sense in Peru, there are a lot of centers which exploit people, and what is the best way to find the place and the setting for the ceremony?
Yeah, well, yes, I mean, it's a good and important question. Obviously safety is of paramount importance when you enter into these fields. It can be a very complex and difficult question. What do we look for? We have no clue. Our education in any environment doesn't provide us with the necessary tools to be able to know, in fact, what is appropriate and what is right, and what it is that we're really looking for in that field. So one thing I think we need to be careful of is transposing the notion of the Eastern guru or master onto the Peruvian or other place shaman. Shamans aren't gurus. shaman aren't even teachers for the most part. Shamans just kind of just get on with it. So they're not of the same ilk or caliber, and they're not supposed to be. Generally what kind of happened was we were mostly brought up in some kind of Judeo-Christian Islamic worldview, perhaps, and we perhaps lost faith in those traditions because they didn't provide us with the experiences that we were really looking for in our religious questioning. And we then turned towards a Eastern model which used certain terms, karma and samsara and nirvana and enlightenment, and we kind of got into that for some time. And now as a culture, we've kind of turned our eye to the practice of shamanism, and we think perhaps that we can transpose those same concepts, those same ideas, and perhaps even the same language onto the shamanic culture, but of course we can't do that. They're not the same. They're not designed to be the same. So we need to at least understand what shaman is supposed to be in its own right before we can begin to say what we'd like it to be in our own expression of that. So if we have a kind of a maturity in what we're approaching these medicines for, and what traditional shamanism is supposed to be able to do for us, at least we have somewhere to kind of work from, a baseline that we can go from. And from there, of course, the internet is a great resource despite its limitations and problems. It can provide us with, enormous quantities of information, obviously sometimes too much. But actually, a lot of the shamans these days do get called out pretty quickly. They don't always last that long any longer. Maybe they could have lasted longer 20 years ago or 30 years ago when there wasn't the internet to kind of, get into them. But nowadays, actually, people get called out on a probably too much of a regular basis in some cases, but obviously necessary in others. So, that's another way we can inquire. And then, of course, if possible, speaking to the shaman themselves, speaking to the teacher themselves. And also another great method is speaking to the students. Where are the students at? Where are the long-term students at? How do they feel? Are they good, kind, ethical, moral, upright people? And this is really what we want to be looking for, is really an expression of morality, an expression of ethics, an expression of kindness, love, and compassion than any expressions of power.
That's wonderful. That's really enlightening words to kind of give an idea to anyone curious about the medicine. Please tell us more about your personal project, which I noticed that you have a sensory deprivation tank built in within your facility now. And in addition to that, I noticed that you are also creating different events for yoga, for Tai Chi, and various different models, adapted from different cultures.
Yeah. Well, again, as I was speaking of earlier, I have this sort of, because I've explored so many different sort of avenues, it's kind of come together in a very holistic way within myself. I've understood how these different systems can bring us to the spaces that we're trying to come to. I found a way to kind of bring it all together, as it were. So we're teaching different modalities, primarily the energy-based work of the Daoist and the internal martial arts traditions. These are very, very powerful traditions for opening up the energy channels, for circulating energy in the body, for cleansing the channels, and for opening up the different subtle occult anatomy of the body. And we're also running ceremonies and beginning to incorporate these different energy-based technologies into the ceremonies themselves, doing particular meditations under the influence of the medicine, allowing the medicine to open up the different practices so that they can come to some kind of level of fruition within us. And we're beginning to work also with the Aquarian energies of spiritualized technologies. So we want to incorporate flotation tanks. We want to incorporate neurofeedback. We want to incorporate EEG reading headgear. We want to incorporate virtual reality. We want to incorporate mind machines, light and sound technology. And I want to use the technologies under the influences of the entheogenic medicine, take the brain readings and the maps that we can acquire from those, and feed them into and through other technologies so that we can begin to recreate some of the entheogenic effects and experiences without having to drink the medicines, perhaps even ultimately at the touch of a button. And we love the medicines. We work with the medicines a lot. We're definitely not trying to sort of, find a way not to use them. But at the same time, we are trying to understand how we can work the brain, how we can work the human energy system, so that we can actually activate all of these inner abilities, all the subtle phenomenon of mind and body without needing anything ultimately, to really begin to understand how we can activate the supernormal abilities, the siddhis, the psychic powers, and how we can also bring about a balance between the left and right hemisphere of the brain. And we're very interested in the brain and its, occult perceptual capacities, things of this nature.
How can anyone find you? Through social media or through email channels or through any other means? How can anyone find you who are interested in all the tools you have equipped in your quiver?
Yeah, thank you. Well, you can always contact us on our Facebook page, which is Evolutionary Shamanism at gmail.com. And our news center now has a website. Our news center also has a Facebook page, and they are both Tantric.com is our website, and Tantric at Facebook is our Facebook page. These are the two best ways to contact us at this stage.
Perfect. And is there anything else you would like to share with the world, which I haven't asked?
Well, I'm sure there's many things ultimately. Just try and be kind, good, considerate, loving people. This is it in the end. It doesn't come down to much more than that. So let's just try and do that. And, we can change the world, whether we're using float tanks or medicines or meditation or anything. Really we can just change the world from the thoughts of our own compassion, our own care, our own love in this way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Paul Diamond. You are really a gem, and I really appreciate talking with you. I hope we can connect back again.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure speaking to you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about ayahuasca and work with Paul Diamond, you can connect with him and his team at tantraya.com. It's tantraya.com. My personal experience working with Paul has been delightful. I hope this conversation sparked the curiosity in you towards these traditional medicines. Please don't be an idiot and do your own research before you indulge into these plant medicines. Have a great time and stay peaceful.